Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. That is Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. I am your host, Sandra Flach. Welcome to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, where I consider it my honor to encourage and equip you for your parenting journey. I'm not just along for the ride, I'm in it with you as a mom of 8 kids, 5 through adoption, including our 2 youngest, who are now young adult sons. They were both diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome about a year after we adopted them. So I know the challenges that come with raising kids who have trauma histories, prenatal exposure to alcohol. You know, it's an interesting journey. And my hope is that you will find this podcast to be an invaluable resource for you as you navigate the ups and downs of parenting kiddos from hard places, as we say. So we have lots of resources for you that I'm going to share, but want to make sure I get a little nugget in there about my devotional book, which is in the editing process. It's called Soul Care Saturday, 52 Devotions for Foster and Adoptive Moms. And my hope is that it will be released officially in November for Adoption Month. So stay tuned to this podcast and all of our other socials and website and all of that for details, because I'm hoping to even share on my socials some book cover options that you can vote on. But stay tuned for those details. I also want to remind you that our updated Justice for Orphans website is now live. Justice for Orphans is the nonprofit that I founded many, many years ago after we had adopted all of our kids. So the website, Justice for Orphans, JFO is the nonprofit that I founded several years ago after we adopted all of our kids, and it's gone through lots of changes and growth. And this podcast that you're listening to, the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, comes under the umbrella of JFO. So the home website that you'll always find everything on is justicefororphansny.org. There is a link in the show notes, but we have just launched a brand new updated version of our website. And to make it super easy, when you go to the home page, you'll have 3 options to choose from on where you want to go from there. And if you are listening to this podcast, most likely you're going to want to go to all of our adoption and foster care journey resources, from this podcast to our FASD training, the support group, all of the things, right? So when you go to the main website page, just click on the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, and it will take you, it'll feel like you're on the Adoption and Foster Care Journey website, because all of our things are there for you to find. So make sure that you do that. Also, please subscribe and follow, like, and all that stuff, our social media pages. We started brand new Adoption and Foster Care Journey pages. So on Instagram, we are at AFC_journey. And on Facebook, it's just the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. Love to connect with you on those pages. We're building them up, getting some great content on there. I'd also love to connect with you in person. Let's see, if you are listening to this in real time, I would say that it is just a couple of days before Actually, no, it's probably right after my Ohio trip. So I'm not going to tell you about signing up or getting involved with the opportunity that I have to speak and share with the Hope Bridge folks in Ohio, because that will have been over by the time you're hearing this. But I will be in the beginning of October in Houston for the Christian Alliance for Orphans Summit, October 1st through 3rd. I will be leading an FASD workshop there. I will have a meetup for parents and caregivers of kids with FASD, and also an exhibitor booth. And then on October 23rd through 25th, I will be in Chicago for the Replanted Conference, where I'll also be leading a workshop on FASD and having an exhibitor booth. So if you can get to either CAFO or Replanted, I would love to see you in person. Stop by the booth, attend one of the workshops or the meetup. We'll take a selfie. So I hope to see you there. Now, September, can you believe it? We're in September, is International FASD Awareness Month. All of our September podcast episodes will focus on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And this week we are continuing not only that, but our monthly neuroscience series with our returning favorite doctor, Dr. Jerrod Brown. We're going to merge that two topics and discuss neuroscience and FASD. Dr. Brown has like 5 PhDs and specializes in topics related to autism, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, confabulation, suggestibility, trauma, and other life adversities, alexithymia, executive dysfunction. Going to be talking about that today. Criminal recidivism, traumatic brain injury, and youth fire setting. He's like an expert on so many relevant topics for us foster and adoptive parents. You can check out his full bio in the show notes. And I'm going to invite you to please welcome back Dr. Jerrod Brown. Hey, Jerrod, welcome back.
Sandra, thank you as always for having me back.
Well, we are just grateful that you always come back because our audience loves our conversations. And last month, we introduced the topic of neuroscience, neuroplasticity, and plan to do several monthly episodes kind of on this topic. And since this month is International FASD Awareness Month, we're going to dive in and look at FASD from that neuroscience lens. FASD is caused when a birth mom consumes alcohol during pregnancy. There's no, I know our audience probably knows by now there's no safe amount of alcohol or time in a pregnancy or type of alcohol or any of that. But so Jerrod, though, could you unpack a little bit or explain how alcohol affects a developing brain?
Yeah, and no safe amount of alcohol, obviously. Thank you for mentioning that. One thing I do want to remind people of when we think about prenatal alcohol exposure, it might not just be that we need to consider. What happens again if birth mom was using drugs or tobacco products or even the kind of food she was eating can have an impact on that developing brain in utero. And the prefrontal cortex is what we're going to really focus on today. And there's obviously the whole brain and the whole body can be impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. And most of the research, most people who do training on FASD really call it a brain-based disorder, which it is, but it really is a whole body disorder. Because if you really look at the research on prenatal alcohol exposure, prefrontal cortex, the brain, the spinal cord, our organs, our skin, our mobility, and we had to understand the whole brain, the whole body.
Yeah.
The brain's complex. Obviously, there's a lot going on in there. I study neuroscience all the time, lots of trainings on it, and I feel like I probably know less than 1% of what's out there. There's just so much. Prenatal alcohol exposure impacts so many different aspects of the brain, and it could impact our coordination. It could impact memory. It could impact attachment in utero, because a lot of people, when they think about attachment, you only think about after birth, but attachment forms in utero.
Yes.
And there's a lot of neurobiological processes associated with attachment. And there's so many rabbit holes we could go down. I'll just talk about like attachment and sleep for a minute with the prenatal alcohol exposure. But if you're really interested in looking at like what does prenatal alcohol exposure do in utero to impact attachment, look at oxytocin and look at some of those chemicals in the brain that are altered. That would be something you want to look at. Sleep issues are profound problem in people with FASD. It's not just, again, after that child is born, but prenatal alcohol exposure can impact parts of the brain related to melatonin secretion. It can impact our sleep-wake cycle in utero. So understanding the effects prenatal alcohol exposure can have on our circadian rhythm alignment as well is very, very important. So I do think, like, if you're a foster parent, adoptive parent, it is so important of what you're doing now, but I think it also helps understanding what happened before your child came to you, because then that'll allow you to maybe, in some cases, be more patient, more understanding, and connecting the dots that maybe some of these behaviors you're seeing now, even though you're doing everything right by the book, might not be working that well because of some of those things that happened before the child was even born. In attachment and sleep and the prefrontal cortex, all those things are just a few of those variables to take into account. And what I have found to be helpful, and it's not the only thing, the more we can learn about neuroscience and really understanding the structures of the brain, the function of the brain, how the brain works, our nervous system, we're in a much better position to maybe modify the parenting practices a bit. And really practically speaking, how would you modify that as a neuroscience informed parent? Well, maybe it is less stimulation in the environment, being aware of the lights you have, being aware of maybe the fragrance you use when you're washing your children's clothing. Just little things like that that we don't think about. Food texture kinds of things. The effects of excessive media exposure. Neuroscience can help us better understand all those things and have a greater appreciation for the things we do and maybe the things we should be doing. So in a nutshell, neuroscience is really understanding the neurological, but also the biological factors involved in our behavior, our learning, our mood state, our attachment, our sleep, and the list goes on and on and on. And really, neuroscience is very multidisciplinary. And at the core, if you're asking yourself, all right, what is neuroscience? How do you define it? Well, it's really the study of the nervous system and the brain. And then the brain and nervous system control everything in the body. Understanding the gut-brain axis, understanding the sleep-wake cycles, understanding our central nervous system, the HPA axis, and the list goes on and on and on. So, Sandra, I'll stop talking right now. So, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm like soaking it all up because I don't think I ever really thought about the brain, my kids' brains, really until I became an adoptive parent. And as I began learning this, many years ago, just when I first learned about trauma, the impacts of trauma. And then it was many years after that where I began to learn about the impact of prenatal alcohol exposure. And to me, it's fascinating because it explains so much of what the day-to-day struggle, like where that comes from as we, raise our kids and go throughout each day with these different challenges that are, that can so much look like willful, on purpose, behaviors that our kids are doing and not really understanding that it's how their brain was affected, it's how their brain works, and they're having a hard time. It's not necessarily some on purpose bad behavior that they're choosing to do. It could just be very well how their brain works. So I find it fascinating.
What you just said reminds me of, I think most parents would probably find behavioral neuroscience just really, really helpful. Neuroscience, there's all kinds of branches of neuroscience. I mean, there's so much going on with this, but I think as a parent, behavioral neuroscience, if you learn the basics there, that ties into exactly what you're talking about. So basically, behavioral neuroscience places us in a better position to help us understand abnormal, concerning, or dysregulated human behavior, thought patterns, emotions. And it really is an interdisciplinary field of study where think of behavioral neuroscience, the umbrella, and then all these branches coming out. One branch psychology, one branch genetics, neuroanatomy, neurochemistry, neurophysiology, and the list goes on. That's a lot for anyone to learn about. Don't feel overwhelmed. You're already kind of doing behavioral neuroscience approaches, but if you really want to study behavioral neuroscience, you'd want to learn the basics of the nervous system. You would want to understand executive function, which is what we're going to talk about today. Attention has a lot to do with this. So if your child has attention issues or is diagnosed with ADHD, behavioral neuroscience can provide a lot of insight into the mechanisms in the brain that are contributing to that, and then what environmental factors are going on in that child's life that maybe exacerbate it or calm it down and make it better. Last week or a couple weeks ago, we talked about neuroplasticity. Behavioral neuroscience and neuroplasticity go hand in hand. How your child learns, how they use language, their memory, their responses to fear or the lack thereof, how they make decisions, personality traits, mental illness, emotions, feelings, motivations. These are all things studied in the behavioral neuroscience literature, and it really plays into child development. And obviously, if you're a parent, you want to foster healthy child development. Your child came to you, had a lot of attachment stuff, maybe some in utero things going on. That can obviously get in the way of healthy child development. But the things we're talking about in this series, I'm not saying it's going to cure your child from those brain-based disorders and deficits, but I do believe in my heart it's going to calm things down and make things better, particularly if you as a caregiver understand these topics, but also then surround yourself with a team of professionals who appreciate and understand these topics.
Yeah, so good. So let's talk about, it's my understanding that the brain forms from bottom to top, and that top part that gets formed last, say specifically the prefrontal cortex. Because that's what we're going to zero in on today. What does this part of the brain do? What does the prefrontal cortex do?
Yeah, it's kind of right here.
Mhm.
The brain's complicated. It's the prefrontal cortex talks to other parts of the brain. It's influenced by all kinds of things, but the research in a nutshell says that the prefrontal cortex is kind of that hub for thought regulation, regulating our thinking, regulating our behavior. So if a child has extreme behavioral problems, they're just bouncing around, they're just so dysregulated frequently. That's probably related to the prefrontal cortex in some capacity. It's not going to be the only thing. Emotions. Do you have a child, teenager, or an adult where they're happy one minute and they just explode the next? They're laughing one minute, they're crying the next, and they just have this roller coaster ride of emotions. The prefrontal cortex is involved there because that is also the hub of regulating our emotions. Decision making is
Yeah.
related to the prefrontal cortex. So if you know someone that makes very poor decisions day in and day out, and I'm not talking like one time here and there, but really a consistent pattern of really bad decisions, reckless behavior, behavior that's very scary, dangerous, puts them at harm's way, puts you in harm's way. Prefrontal cortex is involved there. Problematic social behavior. Look to the prefrontal cortex. Something's probably not working properly there. So inappropriate sexual behavior, stalking, harassment, not understanding like friendship making deficits, intimacy problems. understanding the prefrontal cortex can provide a big piece of the puzzle of what we can do to maybe make these things better. I've come across studies, I don't know where I heard this, but I didn't come up with this, but the prefrontal cortex in the literature has been called a biological control mechanism. So if you know someone that is extremely impulsive, has a lot of anger control issues, they constantly ruminate and they can't let something go over and over and over again. Prefrontal cortex probably is not working. When it's working, it's a control mechanism. It's like a gate. It's like a dam that holds the water back. When that prefrontal cortex has profound damage, that dam is broke and things are just flooding out. And that's why you probably see some children or adults with FASD have extreme rage control in some cases, profound impulse control issues, elopement behavior. If you have a child that has a tendency to elope and just run out of wherever they're at, prefrontal cortex probably is not working on some level.
Oh. So one of the other things that the prefrontal cortex is in charge of, or I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but executive function, right? Because we're going to go to that today, because it's my understanding that that's where the prefrontal cortex is where executive function happens. So what is executive function?
Multifaceted construct. It's multidimensional. Research says it's defined as a neuropsychological construct, a higher order cognitive process. So when you think of higher order, self-regulation comes to mind. It's the CEO of the brain. It's the boss. So it guides the day-to-day behavior. So if somebody has a lot of day-to-day behavioral problems, and they have a lot of unregulated behavior where they just can't sit still ever. They're drifting off. They can't sit during a classroom setting. You're in church with your child and they just can't sit still ever. That's common for a lot of kids, but this would be on the extreme end when we're talking about FASD. That is going to be related to executive dysfunction. Again, there's other things that are going on there, but think of the boss of the brain. It really guides self-monitoring. As we get older, we all get better with self-monitoring. Maybe someone frustrated us. We have the thoughts, but we don't say them. Somebody with FASD who has these issues may get really mad. And if they work a job, they may get really mad at someone and say exactly the first thing that comes to their mind. I just consulted on a case 2 weeks ago. It's an adult female with FASD, has a job part-time, got mad at her boss, didn't have the ability to put on the brakes and pause and reflect and think through that thought. If I say that out loud, I'm going to get fired. So that's a classic example of where maybe our executive function is not working properly. You have a child has FASD, they are going to have poor executive function 100% of the time on some level. It is a spectrum like everything. It could be mild, moderate, severe. But classically speaking, what would that look like day to day? Your child just acts without thinking as they get older. They do not think before acting. Impulsive decisions, things that are scary sometimes, emotional overreaction, extreme temper tantrums could be a sign of poor executive function. Obviously, that's a sign of other things too. Maybe there's some colickiness, some gut health issues, maybe there's some blood sugar regulation, the child isn't sleeping well. Consistently misplacing items and being extremely forgetful is a red flag indicator. Starting a task, the parent walks away thinking the child or teenager has got the task down. The minute you walk away, the child, teenager is off track and can't finish the task, moment by moment attention. And lacking insight too, where just lacking good common sense is a red flag indicator for poor executive function. Before I talk about too how this can factor into like trauma and early maltreatment, and anything I missed from your lens, Sandra? Or?
Yeah, I've also heard for executive function, like when I'm doing a training and I'll make a list because I find that most parents here, because having executive challenges with executive function is definitely a primary symptom of FASD. But a lot of parents don't know, like, so what is executive function? So I'm so glad that we're breaking it down. So I also explain it as you mentioned the impulse control problems with being able to stay focused, short-term memory challenges, planning and organizing, being able to transition from one task to the next. These are all part of that, right?
Yes. Working memory is part of this. That's our brain's post-it note. Cognitive flexibility is a big part of this. That is basically our shifter in our brain. Like, can we go with the flow? Like last minute changes happen or something. Like you tell your child, we were going to go to the park. It's raining out. We can't go now. Can they shift and be okay with that? Or do they just lose it? That's a cognitive inflexibility problem. Inhibition, our brain's parking brake. So when someone with FASD doesn't have good inhibition, the parking brake in the brain is not working properly. So then when the parking brake isn't there, irritability, blurting out things, not sitting still, planning, organization, time management are part of this, decision making, attention. And one thing that is indirectly related to this, it's not executive function, but it develops at the same time as the child gets older, it develops about the same time and they complement each other. Theory of mind.
Mhm.
Theory of mind is perspective taking. It relates to empathy, group decision making, conflict resolution. Most people with FASD, there's not a ton of research, but there's some, also lean to the fact theory of mind deficits are also at play. So you can have executive function
Yeah.
and theory of mind. Theory of mind deficits, the child's in school, they may have a hard time working in a group.
Mhm.
They may have a hard time not monopolizing the conversation where they're not picking up on the fact they're taking over the whole conversation. As that person gets older, that can get in the way of intimacy. It can get in the way of sharing emotional states with other people, and it can look like the person comes off as cold, callous, aloof, or one-sided in some cases as well. Theory of mind deficit's another big topic you'd want to be aware of.
Yeah, I know we did a whole episode, I believe, several
Mhm.
years back it's on
Yeah.
our website on theory of mind. And this is such a refresher for me because I happen to have a kid who, young adult, who is having some struggles at work, not with doing his job, but the interacting with the boss and other coworkers and, not really being able to see anybody else's perspective but their own. Would
Yeah.
that kind of be theory of mind playing in there?
Yes, definitely. Another practical thing that does come up in this literature, but you have to dig for it, is theft. So if you really dig into the FASD literature and criminality and the criminal justice system, it does say that theft might be one of the first kinds of activities that some people with FASD engage in that may then bring them in the criminal justice system. What it says in that literature, executive dysfunctions at play and theory of mind deficits. How does theory of mind deficits relate to theft? The concept of ownership. So the child, teenager goes to their friend's house for a sleepover. They see a cell phone sitting out on the counter. Impulse control issues kick in, executive function, theory of mind deficits, not understanding the concept of ownership, even though that cell phone's sitting out in an open space, that doesn't belong to that individual. So that concept of ownership is sometimes a struggle as well.
Yeah, I just want to jump in because because I work with a lot of parents, and so it's a common story, especially with young teen boys who want the cell phone. They want to be able to access technology. We're trying to protect them, so we're not giving them a regular smartphone with all of the bells and whistles and apps and access. But we've had kids who have gone to a friend's house or gone someplace and taken a cell phone that wasn't there. So it's like basically they would steal a cell phone, and really and I don't know if it's that perseveration piece, the impulsivity piece, all of the things, but they'll take it because all they can think about is getting online and being able to access what they want to access without, reasoning through, this is stealing, this isn't mine, I shouldn't take this, there's going to be consequences. So how does that line up with what you're saying?
Most of everything you just said, all roads lead back to something with executive dysfunction. And then in their theory of mind in a lot of cases, but then what happens if there's fractured attachment patterns or a ton of trauma? It just makes all of these things more challenging. And in my opinion, and I think it's pretty supported in the literature, you're a parent, you're a professional, you work with someone with FASD, you really probably should become executive function informed, but also attachment and trauma informed, because they all work hand in hand. And 70% of people with FASD have attachment problems, the research says. 100% of people with FASD have executive function. And the overwhelming majority of people with FASD have early childhood experiences of trauma, not including the prenatal stuff, but after they were born. Neglect in some cases, exposure to domestic violence, being thrusted into the child welfare arena. The child may be adopted into a loving home, but that really was a trauma leaving birth parents. Even though maybe they were coming out of something really traumatic, you still have the separation trauma. So very important to look through that attachment and trauma lens as well.
Yeah, I know we're going to be doing an episode on, attachment through that neuroscience lens. But it makes me think of even when a baby is adopted at birth, maybe the adoptive parents are in the delivery room, cut the cord. If there was that trauma, that prenatal trauma, and so there's that loss, that severed tie right there.
Mm-hmm.
But also if there had been prenatal exposure to drugs, alcohol, things like that, it's not like the baby's a blank slate and there's no history. There really is a prenatal history that will definitely come into play, especially from that neuroscience lens, correct?
Correct, because you still have 9 months of trauma that may have happened to that baby in utero. And trauma begins in utero. Parenting begins in utero. So if that mom who was pregnant was using alcohol during pregnancy and had no interest in wanting to be pregnant, probably not a lot of bonding going on a neurochemical level as well. So you really, when you think about that, look at the first 1,000 days of life research. That helps explain that. I think we did an episode on that. I can't remember.
I think we did, yeah.
Yeah, so first 1,000 days of life, day 1 of conception, all the way up to age 2. So that child comes to you at birth, and you do everything wonderfully right after that. And now the child has all these behavioral problems, sleep issues, eating issues. Well, it's probably linked to what happened before the child came to you. Now, what you're doing now makes a huge difference long term, but it still will be a roller coaster ride at times. And there are other things we can do that maybe we don't think about. Most people think about like the sensory, the language, the attachment, the bonding. Phenomenal, important. But what about what you're feeding your child? That's a big part of this that we talk about a lot. Look at the nutrition. Work with a good nutritionist who understands FASD. Are they out there? I don't think so, but we'd like them to be. I haven't come across one yet, but we're going to be talking more about that. But nutrition does play a huge role here too.
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond, invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets neurobehavioral model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community.
So just to kind of circle back around, because I do want to spend the rest of the time here shortly just on what parents can do now. But so when there's been prenatal exposure to alcohol, how does that, again, kind of give us the rundown, just kind of like the list of how it affects executive function?
It can impact so many domains. So a couple things would be, as the child gets older, like a baby, you might not see this come out as much. You might see it more in colickiness, sleep issues, arousal problems, feeding, things like that. But as that person gets older, what might you see from an executive function lens? And just know everyone with FASD is different, unique strengths, unique genetics, unique life circumstances. You might see more task completion issues, where again, you start a task, you don't finish it. You might see more forgetfulness. You could see social inappropriateness as that person gets older. You might have more forward thinking problems where that individual is always thinking in the moment and they're not thinking about tomorrow or 5 years from now and how their actions impact other people. You might have a lot of time management issues, a lot of planning deficits. You could see inconsistent motivation. Motivation is a complex topic, but a lot of the research says if someone deals with a lot of motivational deficits, it probably is a self-control deficit that is rooted in executive dysfunction. Obsessional thinking is partially rooted in executive function impairments. Those are a few things you might see practically. And just assume if you're a parent of a child with FASD, you're going to see some of these things without a doubt, because 100% of people with FASD have some level of executive function impairment caused by the prenatal alcohol exposure.
Yeah, and it really begins, I find, to be more obvious that this has come into play when the kids, as the kids get older and they're in middle school and then high school, when they when they have to start being more in charge of planning their time and homework assignments and behaviors in classrooms and just all of those things, not being able to predict or plan. We see a lot more challenges as they get older, right?
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why that is, and there's many, is as that person gets older and they now complete school and now they're out of that K through 12 environment, a lot of those good services may go away.
Right.
And we need to look at FASD through the long game. It's not a short-term thing, it's lifelong. So maybe that child, teenager went to therapy over and over again, had good case management, had good in-home supports. Once that child graduates high school, that doesn't mean they don't need those supports.
Right.
They really need those supports a lot of times through the lifespan. Again, some people with FASD can live independently with the right supports. Maybe they need a little extra help with money management. Maybe they need a good external brain or a good external coach who can nudge them. Yeah, you forgot to turn in this paperwork. Don't you have a doctor's appointment coming up? Setting consistent times, going to bed, meal preparation time, consistency, all of those things. One practical thing too that I see very helpful is really being aware of processing speed weaknesses.
Yeah.
So if you're a parent, learn about that, because we all get frustrated. You might get frustrated at your child because you've told them that same thing over and over and over and over again. hang in there, be patient. It could be a processing speed weakness as well, which basically is a traffic jam or a bottleneck in our brain. So when you get amped up as a parent and you start talking really fast, all those words start piling up in your child's brain if they have FASD. And that child is not going to be able to take in that information, make sense of it. And once it reaches overload, you could see a couple things. The child just shuts down. They burst out yelling and screaming. They run out of the house. They start hitting. They start scratching themselves. I mean, I've heard it all from different cases I've consulted on. So take things slow, be calm, practice good self-care, be aware of that processing speed. I think that's a really important strategy to consider.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I used to be the lecturing mom. And over the years, as I have learned about, the processing speed, and my kiddos tend to have, especially my youngest too, that slower processing pace, giving the lecture, they're missing most of what I'm saying, right? They're not catching it all. Not only that whole cause and effect link part of it, like, giving them that lecture and issuing a consequence or something isn't necessarily going to be an effective approach because they're not making that connection and they're not catching half of what I'm saying anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Teaching, modeling, role playing,
Yes.
practicing it over and over again, but not just practicing it at home. But then if you teach that skill at home, a lot of times folks with FASD have a hard time taking what they've learned in one setting and then applying it to another. And that's why a lot of times traditional talk therapy does not work unless that therapist really knows FASD, because the therapist teaches some great skills in the therapy session, but then does that therapist get the fact that the client with FASD really struggles taking what they've learned in that setting and then bringing that skill and applying it to the school playground or home or the bus or the job or whatever setting it is. Practice it in multiple settings. And that's why, like, skills workers, case managers who understand these things, that's helpful too. Really practical, hands-on things. Other practical things, checklist, writing things down, making things very visual. Why is that good? Because people with FASD oftentimes have working memory deficits. If they have a working memory deficit, they can't hold a lot of information in their brain. The working memory is like it's a chalkboard. There's only so much you can handle on a chalkboard in their brain. They need to put it on paper. Put it somewhere that's visual. Chunk it out too. You don't want too much on one sheet, because I've seen this happen too, where, bless their heart, parents have the checklist, but that checklist then is loaded with all kinds of stuff. Maybe it's one or two things on the checklist. Keep it simple. Breaking down tasks into really small chunks as well. So don't bombard with, again, a lot of tasks, maybe just one thing at a time. Time organizers can be very helpful as that person gets older. I can't count how many cases I've consulted on where the parent really didn't understand FASD and time and organization, and they always would wake their child up, get them ready every morning, which is important, but they kept doing that as that child became a teenager and an adult. As that client became an adult, they could not get themselves out of bed because they were so used to the parent always coming into the room. Okay, it's time to get up. It's time to do this. Teach self-sufficiency as well, but that's going to take time as well, because you want to prepare for more adaptive functioning kinds of things too. Independent living skills, things like that can be very, very helpful. I have many more skills I can give, Sandra, if you want.
Yeah, well, this one that you just mentioned is sort of that this is my house, right? Because I have one of my two, who's approaching 20, really needs more of the one-on-one support to, navigate through the routine, right? So even if I provide the list, he's not going to go to the list and check the things off unless I'm telling him, what's next on your list, right? So reminding, and, you have to brush your teeth before we leave the house. I know that you didn't do that. It's on your list. You didn't do it. And I'll get like, well, I don't care, or I don't like to brush my teeth. Right. So, but when you're 20, so how much, and you said this, right? FASD presents, these symptoms are different in every person with an FASD, right? It's a spectrum. Not every kiddo is going to have every symptom. There's varying degrees of it. One of mine is more extremely impacted because of fetal alcohol syndrome. So trying to teach those things, but knowing also like you have to leave for work now, so these things have to get done. So how do we get, any suggestions on how to get them to be able to kind of own it a little bit more independently in that more extreme case?
Get creative as well, because maybe you, Sandra, as the parent, have been the primary person teaching this.
Yes.
Maybe someone else can teach the exact same thing. And we know how this is as parents. You say the same thing to your child, but then someone else comes along, a friend, a family member, a coach, a mentor. They can say that exact same thing one time, and then that person globs onto it and it sticks. Try things. Maybe it's not working. Try something new. Maybe it's not working. Stay consistent with that as well. Define the goal, make it very concrete. Help explain why you need to brush your teeth too. And so you need to brush your teeth. That person may not connect the dots because of abstract reasoning deficits and executive function. Help them connect the dots. If you don't brush your teeth, what can that lead to? Make things visual. Group role playing can be helpful, I think. Video modeling can be helpful. So not just saying it, but then maybe find a YouTube video where people are brushing their teeth and show it visually and then talk about it. Something like that. Sometimes that can help. It's video modeling is a good intervention. Thought bubble training. Google that. You can find some good stuff that can help with theory of mind as well.
Wow.
Oh, and the other thing, I guess, in my opinion, the number one intervention you want to use, I could be wrong on this, developmentally and emotionally appropriate approaches. Because if your teenager has FASD, and let's just pretend they're 16 years old, they may have a brain of a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old. Make sure what you're doing is developmentally, emotionally, and socially appropriate in terms of what you're asking of them. So it's realistic. Be aware of the terms you use. Also, often professionals use terms with people with FASD. That person has no idea what they're saying, but the person with FASD gives the head nod with the visual impression that, heck yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, even though inside they have absolutely no clue. And that is detrimental for talking about the criminal justice system. That's a whole nother can of worms, but developmentally and emotionally appropriate approaches, definitely use that.
Yeah, always check for that understanding, because like you said, it doesn't always, I give an example a lot of times when I teach that, one of my kiddos, we were teaching appropriate words, appropriate boundaries, because as a teenager, we need to know these things. And I was getting the nods, and that like it seemed completely that he was tracking with me, like great conversation. But before we ended, I just had that thought to ask, do you know what appropriate means? And he was like, no, what does it mean? So we can't just assume that they do understand. We have to check for understanding. And just because they can repeat it back to you or nod their head does not mean that they actually understand it and then can apply it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And we can't forget just living a healthy lifestyle. I know I sound like a broken record, but capitalize sleep, eat healthy, stay hydrated. I'm not talking about staying hydrated on pop and coffee. Work with a sleep specialist if needed. Be around positive people. Try to laugh. Have meal times together. Reduce screen time exposure. Get out in nature more. Learn as a caregiver. Take care of yourself as a caregiver. Reduce burnout. All these things play into this complicated puzzle.
Yeah. There's really simple solutions, right? But they are the ones that work. We go back to basics, I think, and those are the ones that really work. Jerrod, I wanted to ask you a little bit, kind of tie FASD in with the neuroplasticity piece that we talked about last time. Understanding that the brain is plastic, new neural pathways can be formed, all of that. But I've also read that when it comes to FASD, a brain that was prenatally exposed to alcohol, it's a, how would I say it? An FASD brain is maybe not as plastic as a neurotypical brain. Can you speak to any current research on that?
I would say every brain's different again, so I don't want to universally apply this, but in my experience, what I've seen, it takes longer for these skills to take hold. So that's why repetition is so helpful. There's been caregivers I've consulted with where I encourage them to don't look week to week, month to month on success always. Look year to year as well. We may have to look at, okay, what was going on this year? What are we seeing this next year? And I'm not saying things can't get better with some things in a shorter period of time, but a lot of times, again, these things take time depending on the severity of the exposure to alcohol. And if there were other exposures to drugs or other chemicals or malnutrition, it does get more complicated. But I want to give hope too. Whatever we do with healthy lifestyle practices, being around positive people, what we put into our body in terms of nutrition, our sleep, supporting the gut health, that's good for everybody, but it's equally good for someone with FASD. And you would think you would see improvement. For some people, you may not see that improvement right away, but there's been enough cases I've consulted on. You hang in there and you have a good support team, you are going to start seeing improvement. Hang in there too, because also often I do hear during those teenage years, it can get really tricky.
Yes.
As that person gets a little older and they have these supports in place, even as an adult, you might see something called developmental catch-up. Have you heard of that in the literature? Where
Have not.
they start catching up. They're not going to be exactly at their age appropriate age, but in some cases, they are going to start showing some major improvements. But part of that too is, what are they doing with their time? Do they have a job? Are they doing okay in school? Or are they lacking any motivation? Are they on the screen all day long? Are they smoking cigarettes? Are they drinking sugar sweetened beverages all day? And how do they live their life? Who are they around? Who's influencing them? These can all be very, very, very helpful things that can help any of us improve brain health and body health.
So there is hope, right, for our neurodivergent kiddos, but I don't want to offer false hope either, because I sometimes will encounter a parent who is like, if they, once they turn 18 and they're going to be out of the house, or they turn 21, but we don't outgrow FASD, like a person's not going to outgrow autism, right? They don't just suddenly outgrow that. And FASD is a lifelong physical, right, disability that affects the brain and the body, like we talked about earlier. So, Jerrod, give us some hope. You've given us some so far, so I don't want to say that you didn't, but what can the future look like for an individual with FASD, especially one who really struggles with the executive function piece?
Most of the work I do in FASD, I'm working with folks, caregivers, where maybe it's reached a really extreme level. So take that into account when I say this. A lot of the folks I've worked with live in group homes.
Mm-hmm.
Structure, accountability can be very helpful. There's one case I consulted on a while ago where hopefully this gives a lot of hope. The client had a long history of rage control problems, long history of self-interest behaviors, but with a team approach, working with doctors, psychiatry, case managers, group home staff, those behaviors started going down and down and down. They didn't go away 100%, but maybe a flare-up happened and that person could return to baseline so much quicker. The client had a long history of elopement, running away behaviors. that was gone. Why did that go away? Well, people started becoming FASD informed. You understood sensory issues. You understood information processing. You understood that she had an early childhood history of trauma. So people started having a greater appreciation for attachment. People started understanding how sleep deprivation factored into this. So the more you can understand all these pieces of the puzzle and you start putting them together with a team, I do think you're going to see major improvement in a lot of areas. I've seen it firsthand on cases I've been involved with.
Well, that does give us hope because, again, this is a spectrum with FASD, and we may have, I know adults with FASD who maintain jobs, have families, some have even adopted children, and then, young adult kids, teen kids who struggle, but who also can have, maintain a job as well with some supports, can live somewhat independently, or sometimes we call it interdependence. They're not necessarily ready to go off to college independently or live independently or work a full-time job. It really is person specific, but understanding all of this helps the parents, the caregivers, and the professionals be a better support system so that the person can be more successful.
Absolutely, positively. Again, I wanted to stress to your audience where my lens comes from, my experience is working with the folks with FASD who are dealing with a lot of other co-occurring issues, trauma, attachment, even traumatic brain injuries, criminal justice involvement. So unfortunately, I wish I had an opportunity to work with more folks with FASD who didn't have those things, but that's where my lens is more kind of the group home, the criminal justice world, the extreme mental health challenges on top of the FASD.
Yeah, I think you get called in right when it's a serious situation and there needs to be some professional input and understanding on this. So
Yeah.
you're the expert. So greatly appreciate all of this information, Jerrod. As we wrap up, any last thoughts that you want to leave us with on this topic?
Go back to the neuroplasticity if you can. And in this series, it's all going to build on each other. The more you can learn about these things, the better off we're going to be. I'm learning all the time. I have a greater appreciation for all these things. If I could go back 5 years and apply what I know now to the work I did with FASD, there would be many things I would enhance. And I suspect 5 years from now, there'll be way more things. So lifelong learning, stay curious, don't do it alone. Don't think you have it all figured out. I don't think I have anything figured out. I'm keep learning and growing. Reach out to people, talk to people like Sandra, watch these programs, read the articles, form an FASD informed team. You don't have to do it alone. And when you get all these people involved who understand these things, I think that's when we can see a lot of improvement.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Thank you so much. I know you'll be back next month, and I believe we're going to continue our neuroscience series, and we're going to look at the neuroscience aspects of attachment, if I recall, and I know our listeners will not want to miss that. So, Jerrod, as always, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your expertise regarding these very important topics for foster and adoptive parents. Thanks so much for being with us.
You're welcome, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for listening to this FASD month edition of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. Hope you learned a lot from my conversation with Dr. Jerrod Brown. I always do. If you enjoyed this episode, we have a whole series, several episodes with Dr. Brown that I've done over the years, and they are on our website. So you could scroll through dozens and dozens and dozens of episodes from whatever podcast platform that you listen to this podcast on. But if you want to find them just like a whole lot easier, you would go to our website, and which is, of course, justicefororphansny.org. I will put a link in the show notes specifically to where you would get to. It'll take you right to our episodes with Dr. Jerrod Brown, but they are on our Justice for Orphans website under the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. You would click the Adoption and Foster Care Journey and then scroll down, click podcast, and then scroll down, and then there'll be a button that says explore, and that's where all of our bonus episodes are with Dr. Jerrod Brown, and there are tons of them. So all kinds of different topics. So if you really, really want to, I guess it wouldn't be nice to say geek out on it, but if you really like talking all the brain science stuff on all of these different topics that are relevant to adoptive and foster parenting, you will want to check out all of those bonus episodes. And I'll put a special link in the show notes just to take you there so you don't have to navigate all the other stuff. So we love to encourage you and equip you through this podcast, as well as our other great resources for your parenting journey. You heard the commercial about our Hope for the FASD Journey support community. I also offer FASD parent coaching, one-on-one parent coaching, as well as online and in-person FASD workshops, and I speak on other topics as well, but FASD is my thing with my lived experience. So you can find out when all of our workshops and all of those things are on our website. But I've spent years trying to figure out what was going on with my kiddos. Even though they were diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome, there was no real helpful or hopeful information or tools out there. So now I want to provide that for you. So I offer every month a free online 1-hour Intro to FASD workshop. It's live. It's not a recording. It's a little bit interactive, and there is Q&A at the end that you can stay on and ask some questions. I offer it at different times. Sometimes it's a morning, sometimes it's an evening, different days of the week. But every month there's a free one. There's also usually every month a 3-hour, more of a deep dive. It takes everything that you're going to learn in the free intro and it takes it deeper. So I try to offer one of those every month. And then also coming up at the end of October, I have kind of the most in-depth training that I do on FASD, and it's 5 3-hour sessions. We meet once a week for 5 weeks online, and that's using the Facets neurobehavioral model, which is foundational to everything that I teach. So that I'm pretty sure you can already sign up for on our website. So all of those things are found on our website. If you're interested in any of that, we have all of that information there for you. Of course, please subscribe and follow, leave a review, all of those things for this podcast. Share it with your fellow adoptive and fostering friends so that they know about this vital resource. If you like to watch your podcast, we do have a YouTube channel. It is the Justice for Orphans YouTube channel. So the video version of every one of these episodes is on YouTube. If you're interested, you can check those out. Be sure to follow us on our social media. And again, I am so grateful that you spent your valuable time with me today. I am thrilled to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans, and check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.